Jensen, Director of Community Programs here with Trees Forever. And now I can say good afternoon. We've got another fabulous Stewards of the Beautiful Land ready to go for you. This is our last Steward of the Beautiful Land webinar for the season. So without further ado, let's get on with it. Just a reminder, this is our landing page on the Trees Forever website. So check it out for all things Stewards of the Beautiful Land. It's where you're going to be able to check out some of the links to the past presentations that we've had. Also remember, I'm getting ahead of myself here now. Don't forget our Facebook group. Bree has done a fantastic job curating our Stewards of the Beautiful Land Facebook group, so be sure to check that out and follow us there. I think we have one final planting, if my memory serves me, and then we'll be wrapped up with the field days as well for this year. So stay tuned for some sort of a little recap on some of the places that we've been this year and some of the field days that we've had. Just a reminder that you should be able to see and hear us, but we cannot see and hear you. So the way that you can interact with us is in that questions tab, So please type in any questions that you may have. We'll try to answer them if someone knows, and then otherwise we'll just wait till the end and allow the presenter to go through those questions that have been asked. This is also where you can reply if we have any quiz questions. I'm pretty sure there's some quiz questions coming up in one of our talks here today. So that's how you'll use that questions tab. It's a way to communicate with us. So not only will you ask questions, but you can also provide answers or guesses to quiz questions that we have. Well, I think we're going to get started here with our presentation here, putting it all together. How about putting your plants to bed? Try that. So I'm going to get things started here and talk a little bit about the nuts. And then Brad's going to take over with some tree care. And then Bree's going to wrap things up with everything else as it is. So let's jump into harvesting and storing nuts. So I guess the place to start is going to be a quiz. So any idea what this nut might be? Please put your answer in the questions box, and I'll give folks just a moment to look it over, see what it might be. I'll also give you a clue. This tree is found in all of Iowa's 99 counties. So that's a clue. And we've got a couple of answers coming in here. And the correct answer is yes, indeed, black walnut. So this is the black walnut native to all of our 99 counties. So when we talk about harvesting and storing nuts, the first question we need to ask ourselves is, what is the goal? What are we trying to achieve here? Are we harvesting nuts to eat or to maybe store to eat later? Or are we harvesting nuts to germinate into new trees and shrubs? And while the harvesting portion of this probably won't change for either of those, the storage certainly will change, without a doubt. So assuming you want to eat the nuts, it's good to understand that many nuts are not that great fresh. There's exceptions, of course, so fresh chestnuts come to mind, but things like hazelnuts and black walnuts and hickories need a little bit of time to cure and dry before they're best to eat raw or roasted. And furthermore, I want to make a clear distinction that when I'm talking about storing nuts to eat, I'm talking about in-shell nuts. I'm not talking about kernels. So a pretty big, certainly, distinction there. Okay, so husking. Husking is going to be the first step after harvesting, and it's necessary for most nuts. Black walnuts, butternuts, hazelnuts, hickories, pecans all have a husk surrounding them. Chestnuts, as you can see here, have this spiky burr. Although a lot of times the nuts will fall from the burr after it opens, but certainly there's whole burrs that'll fall to the ground, and then you'll need to open them, split them open to get to the tasty nuts. But that can be done with just your feet and spreading them apart with your shoes, so to speak. Now, let's be clear that storing chestnuts is going to be different from other nuts. And that's because chestnuts are just so much different than other nuts. Where other nuts are mostly fat and protein, chestnuts are mostly starch. And so they're highly, highly perishable. In fact, for high quality chestnuts, orchard owners must be out there harvesting daily to get those fresh nuts into the coolers so that they don't lose moisture and dry out. So for short-term storage, basically up to a month or so, you can keep chestnuts refrigerated at about 40 degrees Fahrenheit in a sealed plastic container. But if you're thinking of going longer than that, maybe up to a year, you're going to need to freeze the chestnuts to 0, obviously, degrees Fahrenheit. Be sure they're nice and frozen. Okay, so we have 2 new nuts. Can anyone identify these nuts? Again, I'll give folks just a moment to think about it. Maybe put their answer in the questions box. And maybe a hint. For one of these nuts, the name of the nut is all about its shape. Okay, so in the middle of our screen to the right, we're going to have a shellbark hickory. And then on the left-hand side there, that the nut that's shaped like a heart is in fact a heart nut. So storing other nuts. So other nuts like walnuts, hazelnuts, hickories, pecans, butternuts, and the like, storing some small lots in the fridge or the freezer is ideal after drying down. But if that's not possible, you can store in a cool, dry place, ideally below 55 degrees with good air circulation. So as a frame of reference, when I harvest my hazelnuts in the fall here, we've finished harvesting, husking now. We want to get them dried down in the husk, and then we want to get that husk removed kind of as quick as we can. And so the in-shell nuts that don't have any husk on them at all, we'll put those into some 55-gallon drums and literally just let them dry down in the shed until typically about December. And that's when they've had time to cure down and dry, and we'll start in on cracking them, and then they're good to roast and eat the whole 9 yards. Fresh hazelnuts, high moisture content, kind of rubbery, and just not very good to really eat as a fresh crop, like many other nuts. Okay, let's see here. Let's jump into the other track here. So let's assume now that you want to store nuts for germination into new seedlings. The main rule of thumb here is not to let your nuts dry out. Like we talked about earlier, the husking is going to be basically the same. It's going to be step 1, just to get that husk removed and get down to the clean in-shell nut. That's what we're looking for. Nuts like black walnuts are often floated in water to determine if the kernel has filled within the nut or if it's a blank and empty. And so your heavy nuts are going to sink, and they're going to have a higher likelihood of germinating, while those empty seeds are going to float, and you can skim them off and throw them to the squirrels. Don't waste your time. Now, just a quick note on this, that don't let your nuts dry out before floating, because once the nuts have dried, most of them will float. So again, do this before the nuts have had a chance to dry out. And that's really a very important step when you're traveling down this whole germination path, is being sure not to let those nuts dry out. Okay, so I just mentioned that letting your nuts dry out, and this really is rule number 1, 2, and 3 for getting good seed to germinate. Now, for either stratification, which I'll talk about in a moment, or for just longer term storage, like say for the Iowa State Fair, which takes place in August every year, almost 10 or 11 months after the nuts are harvested. So if you want to provide samples to the nut judging competition at the Iowa State Fair, you basically got to store these nuts a whole year. So to do that, basically looking for moisture rate of about 25 to 30%. And again, this is for the in-shell nuts, not the kernels, not the kernels. Okay, let's talk stratification. But first we have a new nut. So anyone recognize this nut? Anyone recognize this nut? It is native to Iowa, I'll say that. And it grows on a shrub. So that's maybe a little bit unique. It does not grow on a tree. It looks like it looks like the offspring of the mighty oak, but it is not. But it is not a diminutive shrub. It can be quite large. They can grow 10, 12, 14 feet tall. It is none other than the American hazelnut. The American hazelnut. Okay, so stratification. Stratification is the process of exposing seeds to the cool, moist temperatures, which mimics what happens in nature to seeds that are buried in the soil under snow for the winter. And so that's all we're doing. And so to break that dormancy, seeds are stratified by keeping them moist in a mixture of oftentimes moistened peat moss or a mixture of sand and peat moss that is damp but not wet, very important. And then basically into the refrigerator for a couple of months. And then after that, you can pot those seeds and wait for them to germinate. So this whole stratification process is merely trying to mimic nature, but in your refrigerator. So these seeds would have fallen to the ground. They might have been covered up just a little bit. They might have been buried by a squirrel or something like that. But they need that stratification period, that time of cold temperatures, moist temperatures. Sometimes stratification happens by soaking nuts in cold water. I've heard of that. And so each nut really kind of has its own regime for stratification, for ideal stratification. But in general, providing that moist peat moss, not wet so that they mold, we don't want anything like that, and then just into the refrigerator for basically 3 months, pull them out, pot them up, and if you do all those things right, you should get something like this, which is a seed that is germinated and is ready to go. Grow, ready to grow, I should say. Okay, folks, that's it in a nutshell for me. Womp, womp, womp. Any questions that folks have before I turn it over to Brad? And I have to skedaddle here a little bit early at quarter till, so if you do have a question, please don't hesitate to ask it now, and I'll do my best to answer it. Otherwise, we can certainly come about at the end. And then a question right off, do the nuts ever mold? Yes, without a doubt, nuts can mold. So one of the things that you can do to reduce the chance of molding is certainly to get all of that husk material off of the nut. So that leafy plant material, that the husk part of it, that can certainly mold, but the nice round in-shell nuts, by and large, allowed to dry down, won't mold. It's in those cases, or the other situation is when you put those nuts into the refrigerator. If it's too damp in there, it needs to be damp but not wet. And I know that is a distinction that's sometimes difficult, but if it's too wet, they can turn mold. If they're damp, they'll be just fine, certainly. Any other questions? Well, from nuts to trees, what a great segue. Ladies and gentlemen, Western Iowa Field Coordinator. Oh, bonus question. I almost forgot. Hey, folks,
There you go.
what do we got here? Any thoughts on what these two nuts are different, obviously? We have the one on the left. We have the group on the right. Any thoughts on what those nuts might be? Pop that into the questions tab. And had a follow-up question about maybe planting nuts directly into the ground in the autumn And the answer to that is absolutely. Just remember, squirrels can find where you put those plants essentially and those buried those nuts. So you really got to do something to keep them protected, whether that's underneath some hardware cloth or something like that. But yes, you can certainly plant nuts right into the ground, direct seeding, and they're going to do real well. And so we have a couple of guesses here, and so far so good. On the left-hand side, we've got none other than the pecan or pecan, depending on your province. And then we have on the right-hand side some hickories, and these are some smaller shell bark hickories. So there we go. Okay, now without further ado, we have Brad Riphagen.
Hey everybody, looking forward to talking to you a little bit about tree care, and most of what we're going to talk about today are many things that you've probably been doing to maintain your trees after you planted them to start with, but it's a more of a refresher. So let's get into it, Jeff. So as we always talk about when we're planting new trees and as we're going into the winter, watering is probably the most important thing once we've planted our tree properly. And so we encourage everyone to continue watering, especially young trees, well into the fall and into the winter, if possible, until we have a good freeze or good, the ground starting to freeze well. So again, as we always talk about, or we encourage folks to do, that 5 to 10 gallons on a weekly basis, depending on what you're getting for moisture in terms of rain. But that is kind of a rule of thumb that we work with, and we encourage you to continue to do that, especially, like I said, again, with small young trees that we've just simply planted probably just this fall or earlier in the spring. And so those are the kind of things that we'd encourage you to keep doing. Now, what's the next one, Jeff? There we go, mulch. So this is another one thing we talk about right away when we're planting trees is mulching them, as we're putting them in on the site where they're going to be for hopefully for the rest of their lives. And at this point of the year, if we put them in the spring, that mulch may have gotten knocked away by a mower. It may have just started to decay and reduce down. And so it's just a good thing to think about doing this time of year to replenish that if you can. And what does that do for the plant? Well, it does all the same things it did in the spring. I mean, it holds moisture in the ground. It keeps us from hitting them with our mowers and our string trimmers. But one of the nice things it does, especially say we don't get snow for a while, it does a really good job of moderating the temperatures for those new roots that are developing under the soil. And so if we can slow down that freeze, or at least moderate how quickly it happens below the tree, that will save some of those new roots and allow them time to harden off as they go into winter. So mulching this time of year is a great thing to do. And say you didn't do it this spring, hey, go ahead and do it now. And it could be like you're seeing here. We would encourage you to use an organic mulch of some type. That tends to be the most beneficial for the trees. And so if you're a person that your neighbors don't mind, piling your leaves back around the base of the tree is not a bad thing to do. So that's another thing to continue to do even as the tree gets older. So mulching going into the fall. Next thing is, not that we're encouraging you to prune now, because obviously there's still leaves on the trees and they're going to be dropping those leaves here shortly. But one of the things I like to do once they start dropping their leaves, especially, is you can see the scaffolding or the branching of the tree so much better once those leaves have fallen off. And so then you can start thinking, okay, now what am I going to take off of this tree, or does it even need pruning? So what would tell us that we need to prune a tree? Well, some of the main things I look for, and this is especially important in young trees, and this is what I'm talking mostly about, and you see in the picture on the right, is that we're pruning a young tree. Even though we have to use a pole saw to get to the top of it, we're not looking at a tree that's probably 30 years old. We're looking at a tree that's 4 or 5. And the thing is that we're really going to focus on is to continue to encourage a main leader or a single leader. And so if you're starting to see 1 or 2, 3 branches that are competing for that lead spot, now is the time, as after it drops its leaves, to correct that as if you can. And so that would be to remove leaving one of those leaders and remove those others, so that you are again promoting that strong central leader for those young trees. Now, other cuts you can make, as you're seeing in that diagram, are branches that cross others. So they're going to be rubbing, they're going to cause wounding on another branch. Remove those. Branches that turn toward the inside of the tree, those kind of things can be removed. And even just starting to think about, I know many people like to mow under their trees. I like to leave the branches low so they hit their heads and so they have to stay away, but that's me. But you can start removing some of those lower branches so that you have that clearance toward the bottom of the tree. Now, how much do you remove? Well, if you haven't heard by now, the rule of thumb is no more than a third. And also consider the age of the tree. Now, I'm talking young trees, so they tend to be more vigorous in growth typically. So a third is a good rule. But if, say, for instance, somebody's coming to take care of your tree that's in your yard and it's 40-year-old tree, do not take a lot out of that tree. Those trees are slower to recover. And so you want to think about how much you remove in terms of how old that tree is. Now, just as a reminder, next slide, please, Jeff. How do you make those pruning cuts? And so this is a nice diagram just showing you, again, if you're taking a branch that you cannot remove with a lopper, and that would probably be something that's 2 inches or probably inch or larger probably. And so we very much encourage a pruning cut that we call a 3-cut method. And so if you look at that, the yellow line obviously is the first cut. Basically, you're cutting partway through that branch. You make a second cut that removes all of the weight of that branch. And what that first cut does is keeps that bark that would be on the underside of that branch from tearing back down the base, the trunk of the tree, so that the weight of that branch isn't ripping the bark past that yellow cut mark. And that's very important, because what we're trying to do is minimize the size of the wound that we want the tree to be able to recover from. And then you make your final cut with a shorter stub that's not going to tear your bark from that. And that final cut is outside of that branch bark ridge, which you see is that ridge coming up between the branch and the stem there. And you want to make that cut outside of that. And as you can see in the picture to the left, again, it's outside of that ridge. And that is what your wound looks like. Ultimately, what we want your wound to look like is the one that's furthest to the right, and it's totally covered over. And so in order for a tree to do that, we want to encourage you to make the smallest wound possible in the right position, so that the tree can then form that callus wood over top of that wound, seal it off so that decay does not start to form down into that tree itself. And typically we find that if we start removing branches much larger than 4 inches, trees many times cannot cover a wound that large in a short enough amount of time in order to reduce the amount of decay. So that's why we'd like you to continue to look at your trees on a regular basis. Plan for that pruning, plan for those pruning cuts this fall or this winter, and have that taken care of as you work through the winter. And in your own yard, you can do it, whenever the weather's nice. You don't have to make a big plan for one whole day, or just hey, I need to make a couple cuts here and there. And so take care of that as you can throughout the winter. Again, just another reminder, most of you probably know this, but know again, oaks and elms, we only work on in the dormant months if we can help it. And that would be from probably November, after the leaves have dropped. I'd say maybe December would be safer, until March. And that's typically what is happening anymore. Used to be till the middle of March, but we seem to be warming up a little bit earlier than we used to. And so kind of keep that in mind when you get to that point. So if you're going to do work on an oak, those are the times to do it mostly. Other trees are a bit more forgiving. The reason we do it with oaks and elms, obviously, is to reduce disease movement from the critters that move it around. Beyond that, again, pruning cuts are important for your trees, and make them at the right times. What is this one? Let's see. I know what this one is. Sorry, I'm babbling. Tree tubes, gator bags. So some of you have larger plantings out there, and you've been using tree tubes, well, this is a good time of year to go out and inspect those tubes. And so there are things that have been nesting in there. You might have mice nests down in the bottom. You may have bird nests in them. Those are the things that you want to have removed. So pull your tubes up, clean those nests out, make sure those are, you have a mouse nesting around the base of your tree through the winter, that tree's probably not going to be alive in the spring because they're going to prune, or they're going to eat the girdle at the base of that tree, and you probably won't have a tree in the spring. So those are good things to keep in mind. Aside from the tree tubes, gator bags, if you're familiar with those are those bags that wrap around the base of a tree and we use to water the young trees in the summer months. And if they're not removed, they're a great environment for moisture to stay, to start causing rot to happen in that tree, and also a great hiding place for any small animals that would like to sit in there during the winter. Gives them nice shelter and so forth. That's another thing that you want to be aware of, and have those removed in the fall so that you no longer provide that environment for the small animals and the moisture to sit there. They also, if they sit out in the winter, may maintain some water in them, and also be destroyed from the freezing. The last thing I want to talk about is protection, and there are a number of reasons to do this. One of the main reasons many communities find for protection of their trees, their young trees especially, is animals, deer especially, but rabbits, mice, those types of things. So what you're seeing on the far right is taking it to a, I don't know, it's not an extreme, but it is very effective way to protect that young tree. And so it's a cattle grate basically, or a hog grate, whatever you want to call it, in a circle. So it's a 5-foot circle, and around the base of it they have chicken wire, so that keeps the rabbits out. The larger wire keeps the deer out, and in order to save on maintenance throughout the whole when taking care of that young tree, you mulch out to the outside edge of that. Great way to start a new tree, and then it's a very effective method to keep deer and rabbits, so forth, off of a young tree. A couple other ways we do it, a little more for residential areas, not so large of a exclosure, I should say. But there are a couple other things that you can do. So the white tube that you see, it looks like a corrugated tube. Those are used quite often to protect the stem of the tree or the trunk. And that is used to keep, again, animals off of it, especially deer, from rubbing against a young tree like that. On the far right of that picture as well is a black mesh type thing, but it's a stiff mesh, and it does the same thing. It is not a solid tube or corrugated tube like the white one. The reason the black one is a good choice as well as the white one, the black one, what we don't want to see is black tile put around the tree, because what happens in the winter is that heats up, and that it can cause damage to the stem of the tree, especially on those warm days when it is heating up. And so we can cause bark splitting on the tree due to that black tubing on there. So again, the white tubing will reduce that because it reflects the heat, and that black mesh type situation is also going to not allow for heat to build up along the stem of the tree. The last picture, the one in the middle there with the wrap, that is something you can do as well. That will protect the stem of the tree. It's not something I see as much as we used to. Something that we talked about doing a long time ago to reduce the temperature changes in the stem of a tree, so especially things like maples and young ash and so forth, other trees that have thin bark. And that would work. That was effective, but it's something you need to remove in the spring of the year, because again, moisture buildup behind that, and damage to the stem of the tree, but because of that moisture buildup. So those are the main things I'd like to encourage you to do, or take a look at this winter as you walk around your yard, or you think about your community trees. Watering, mulching, getting ready for pruning. If you have any tubes or gator bags around, take care of those, and then protection of those trees from any types of predation or animals that may be attacking them. Thank you. Now on to Bree.
Fantastic. Let me stop sharing my screen and allow Bree to bring up her presentation.
Let's see. There we go. All right, everyone. Can we see my screen there?
Coming through great. Thank you, Bree.
Perfect. I'm taking over this part of the presentation for putting your natives to bed. My name is Bree Hole Jimenez, and currently I'm the Northeast Iowa Field Coordinator. My email and work cell are listed up there, but if you need me to come back to this or throw it in the chat, just let me know. So a little bit on my background, because we're tree people. What could I know about those natives? So I spent 2 years as a Green Iowa AmeriCorps member at the Tallgrass Prairie Center, getting a good crash course on the whole shebang, from roadsides to remnants to reconstructions. And then as of November 1st, it will be my second year with Trees Forever, getting a little more practice being out in the field, helping communities get those natives and maintain healthy spaces. Before that, I have a bachelor's of arts in biology with minors in environmental science and leadership, which has helped me lead those volunteer events from Wartburg College. And then, of course, my hobbies include skunking around in prairies, playing card games, and reading. All that fun stuff. So, starting with that fundamental question, if you do not already have natives in your yard, if you're kind of on the fence about it, so why would you want them in your yard? So I could give you all of what we typically say, but I pulled these points from the American Society of Landscape Architects, the experts. So they said that native plants are healthier and stronger. That is also very true. So when you go to get a native plant to incorporate into your yard, whether it be in a small meadow space or in more of a curated space, these plants, especially if you look for Iowa sourced plants that came specifically from our areas, and if you go as deep to go into zones, they are built for where you are planting them. And so they have those healthy root systems that can grow up to 15 feet deep. They can and they're also built for this climate, which is very important. And since they are perennials, the hope is that they last year to year rather than those annuals that will die off and you'll have to replace the following year. Plus, because they're in the right spot, you're more likely to have those big, beautiful blooms and colors that you might be looking for. Additionally, it might create wildlife habitat in your backyard or front yard. And I don't want you to worry too much here. While I know many are worried about, oh, I don't really want those mammals, I don't want the mice, and I don't want the lizards and the snakes. They're not so bad. And also, it's not going to be as much for them as it is for our birds and our pollinators. So we'll get a lot more of those butterflies, those bees, those things that you really want to see. And then, of course, it helps the environment, not just above, but below the surface. So you have this above ground habitat and resources for the birds to eat, nest, the insects to eat, pollinate, spread. And then you also have a nice biome beneath the ground that your plants would be restoring. There's a reason why Iowa was chosen to be such a good farm space. It's these plants that help restore that soil. So if you kind of have those rough areas where you can't really get much to grow regularly, maybe this might be that answer. So then we get into the maintenance issue, and this is where I kind of want to bust a myth here. So they are lower maintenance, relatively speaking. So there is that myth that once you plant the natives, you don't have to worry about them anymore. You don't really have to do anything and they'll be fine. There is upkeep that needs to be done, especially in the first couple of years that you have them, especially depending on the type of planting that you're going for, but they are lower maintenance. So most obviously, being a perennial, you don't have to replant each year. That makes things a ton easier. You do need to pay attention to the above ground stems. With annual plants, they tend to break apart, decompose. They're smaller, so even if you do have to remove them, it's a little bit easier. But because these large stems, this large mass of plant material may be left above ground, it can be a little bit more to keep that up. But compared to purchasing and replanting each year and making sure that that space is weeded, those types of things, it can be greatly reduced. Then you get that natural and diverse beauty. So that's just more of aesthetic. because they are, like I said, in that space that they're meant to be, they're more likely to thrive. And you get all of this variety that you don't typically see when you go to a nursery and get non-native annuals. So let's hop into those types of plantings. So I'm breaking these into two different ways that you can incorporate these perennial natives into your yards. So there's the traditional landscaping, which is where we're going to start. And then I call them small meadows. I'll define that a little bit better later, but we're going to start with that traditional landscaping that you might see in the front yard. So this is basing off of how we would typically arrange our yards, especially if you hire someone or you live, say, in an HOA, that type of thing. So we're talking mulched beds, individual plants mulched around and highlighted, hardscaping, so those stones, walking paths, maybe even water fixtures, and then very intentional design. Like this whole where what plant is was intentionally placed there with hard boundaries between your planting bed and, say, turf grass or whatever other space you may have. So getting everybody ready for the winter, there are tiers to what you can do depending on what your area allows. Rural native landscaping looks very different than urban or even like I said, HOA spaces. So, and then I put this in quotes, they typically don't want something that looks messy. So starting from the good, piling leaves around the base, cutting the stems low to the ground. So I'm a big proponent of leave the leaves. In general, if you leave the leaves in your lawn, it will mulch itself anyway, and then it provides that carbon back to your lawn, and it makes it healthier, reduces work that you have to do. But if you do have to move the leaves out of your lawn, a great way to keep that in your space is to pile them around the base of the stems as sort of a winterizing mulch. And if you have to keep the stems cut, you can cut them low to the ground, but you do lose some of those benefits that you might have for the stem nesting bees and maybe even those ground nesting bees, but adding those leaves to the base can still support them. Better, if you still need to cut the stems, but it's okay if they're a little bit taller, cut them to about 1 to 2 feet. You just lose those seed heads and pile those leaves around the base. So I want to bring a little attention to this cute little carpenter bee down in the corner. They will thank you because this was something that I found out that was really interesting to me and may come as a surprise to others, but and maybe even something that you can share with people who don't know, but not all bees live in hives. A lot of them are ground nesters or stem nesters where they lay their eggs in segments of stems that are hollow, such as in prairie plants. And over winter, they develop. And when they receive those external signals, whether it be the stem itself being cut or just naturally being broken, those temperature signals, they will fully develop and emerge. But a friend of mine, we've actually seen that, which is really cool. The other thing you want to be careful about is not doing things too early, because if you, that's in the next slide, we'll get a little bit later, but so the best way is to leave the entire stalk with the seed heads standing and leaves around the base. Like I said, starting at the bottom, those leaves around the base provide great habitat for our ground nesters. And then as you go up the stalks, you get the stem nesters. And then at the very, very top, if you leave the seed heads, it might seem like there's nothing going on there, even the wind has dispersed all of the seed, but there is still value there. Our birds that overwinter with us, they often use those as a food source. And so leaving the seed heads around allows them to have that additional source of food and even nesting materials that they otherwise might not have. But like I said, it can look, I'm doing air quotes here, messy. So that's why we have these different tiers of maintenance that can help make sure that you're staying within regulation, but also doing what you want and having your lawn serve you the way you want it to. So then we're going to hop into the traditional landscaping spring follow-up. So like I said, wait. If you cut back or prep your garden too early, you could trigger those natives into emerging too early. They look around, they say, oh no, there's no food. And then we lose them anyway, and you lose that benefit that you had with planting them. So what I recommend, if at all possible, wait to start doing your garden prep until late May or even early June. It just allows all of that time for them to finish developing and actually have food available to them when they do emerge. Like I said, my friend and I, we were walking, we accidentally cut a stem and happened to see one of those stem nesting bees in there. And unfortunately, someone at the TPC was able to tell us it's cut. They're not going to be able to survive anyway. You may as well take him inside and see what the process looks like. He did emerge. He did fully develop. Unfortunately, because there was nothing around, he did die, but it was a very good learning experience for us. So like I said, at the end of the spring, you don't really need all of that excess thatch or material that's above ground and drying, and it can even get in the way if it builds up for too long of your plants resprouting. So cutting back those stems at that time, and even mowing if you can get them low enough, make it just similar to mowing to get a fresh start. You can use hand clippers or even scissors sometimes are just fine. Just try not to disturb the roots too much, because that's where a majority of that healthy plant mass is that keeps them there. All right, so types of plantings, we're getting into the small prairie meadows. So the previous type was more of the traditional individual plants, mulching around, kind of highlighting those things, making it much more curated. This is kind of a more quote unquote wild way to do it. This is the picture in the background is more of an extreme version. It's actually Benjamin Voigt's yard. Who advocates for this. He's the author of Prairie Up and gosh, what was the other one? A New Garden Ethic, both really interesting reads about transforming your turf lawn into prairie spaces and the benefits that you can have. He also talks a little bit about the cultural dynamics between those things, but he's a great resource to learn about them. So you can have it be your entire yard, like I said, much more of an extreme version. Or what you can also do is set aside planting beds, which are surrounded by, you know, landscaping, stone, brick, wood, that type of thing, that makes it look more intentional, but allow more of a diverse, quote unquote, wild mix in there. But it can often get around those rules that you might have. So they are kept within those boundaries or taking the entirety of a green space. And then I really like the quote that he has, ultimately every garden is an ideology. So yeah, and you can see in this picture just the wide variety of plants that he has in there. Just even from looking at it, I've got rattlesnake master, liatris, conehead or gray-headed coneflower, that kind of thing. I even see some lead plant over here. So you could definitely have something like this on a large or a small scale in your yard. And then we get into the winter prep. I'm going to do it on the same 3 levels as before. This is actually Benjamin Voigt's yard during the winter as well. I know it can look a little messy and scary, but this is at the kind of best level of just leaving it alone completely to do its thing. So starting with the good, mowing down about 2 to 3 inches, kind of low, in the late fall, early winter may be recommended in the early years anyway, especially if you're going to do some overseeding, and it's meant more to simulate a burn. And it can also make your yard look quote unquote clean for the coming year. And it could get around some of those pesky regulations. And burns aren't always recommended. We'll get into that in the next slide, but the better way would be cutting back in early fall, allowing some growth afterwards to remain, just leaving some of that thatch above ground. Like I said, kind of those levels of really, really low, just really helping the ground nesters, to kind of just helping the ground nesters and the stem nesters, up to the best, leaving it alone completely. You have tons of habitat that can be overwintered in, as well as a food source. So, and then we get our spring follow-up. Don't be worried about the fire. That's what I'm getting into. Like I said, this slide is very similar to the spring follow-up prep for the more curated lawns, but biggest thing is wait. If you cut back or prep your garden too early, you could again trigger those natives that you were giving habitat to. So around May is the best time to start mowing and overseeding. I know sometimes cities get a little antsy if things start to look a little too nuts around that time, but if you can wait as long as you can, you'll get the most benefits. Most of what you're doing at that time too is to emulate either a burn, like you can see on the bottom right, but burns aren't always possible. More often than not, are not possible at all in rural areas. So we want to simulate that, or large mammals that used to graze those spaces and turn up the soil. So around May is best time to start mowing. You can mow pretty low and then potentially even overseeding. Overseeding is recommended in the fall or the spring, depending on what you're looking for, and comes with different results. But like I said, it's best to wait. I know it's hard, especially when things start to get nice and green after a long cold winter. Just looking outside, you want to get out there, you want to make it look nice, but it's best to wait. And I've got a little bonus here for you all. So seed collection, if you have your own native plants in the yard, you don't have to go out to a prairie, though going out to a prairie is a lot more fun in my opinion. You get to collect your own seed in your backyard. So rules of ethical seed collection are pretty much the same, except since it's your own yard, you don't have to ask permission to be in that space, which is nice. So absolute number one, the 20% rule. Only take about 20% of the seeds or seed heads from each individual plant. This is to ensure that enough of the seeds make it back down to the ground to reseed in case this plant dies, or to build up that seed bank, or can float along and spread as well. It also ensures that species or individual diversity, which you really want. You don't want a bunch of clones of the same plants in one spot. It also allows some of those seeds to remain behind as a food source, like I said in the previous slides, so that those birds and other things can come by and munch on them. No roots. We do not want to see those roots when you are seed collecting. If you want your individual to survive to the next season, avoid pulling up the entire plant. So when you first get this started, and sometimes in lawns it can take a little bit longer, the roots can be pretty sensitive and not as long as you might expect, and any damage to the roots could compromise its ability to survive. So I recommend using scissors and clippers to remove those seed heads so you're not pulling on the stem at all. And paper bag it. Paper bags are the best option. They're breathable. They allow that moisture to come out. Once you have collected your seeds and labeled the bag, you can set it out in a cool, dry spot to dry out, and then they should be ready for processing and planting in the fall or in the spring. So when collecting your seeds, try to keep the species separate if you can identify them. And there's actually a free seed manual online at tallgrassprairiecenter.org that can guide you through how to clean them and the best germination practices. So typically, that guide also tells you when they should be going to seed and what to look for. Some plants, depending on what you have, it might be better to harvest the seed a little bit more than earlier than you think you should, like with partridge pea. If you let them sit for too long, the seed pods actually burst open and they spread everywhere, so then you can't really collect the seed. A couple of different species do that. Spiderwort is the same. And so some of those little things you might miss, and those might be some really pretty flowering plants that you want to see a little bit more of. For others, it might just be how to remove the fluff, like with milkweed. I know that's kind of a tough part, is separating the fluff from the seed. There's a couple of methods that you can use with that, so that's a great guide for it as well. Yeah, that's just a fun thing you can do outside, and it's a great way to also connect with your neighbors, family, kids. Just get out there, get your hands a little dirty, and learn a little bit more about how your yard is helping the environment, and get a little more bang for your buck after you plant these plants. I think I breezed through that a bit quickly, but I think we are also ready for questions.
Thanks, Bree. That was awesome.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I feel like I breezed through it a little quick. I get excited about these things. So I'm like, oh, I gotta get all the information out. So yeah, any and all questions are welcome.
And we may have been so thorough. You know, they may not have any questions, Bree.
I mean, that's fair. It's a lot
Oh no, here they
more.
come. Sorry. Oh, funny.
All right, we've got, where can we go to learn more about native species recommendations for prairies if starting from scratch? So I definitely recommend the Tallgrass Prairie Center's website has a lot of really great information, especially technical information. And they do also have a help desk number that you can call. The native plant nurseries like Prairie Moon, Allen Dan, things like that, they can also give you some really good recommendations and help you decide what species would go well in your space. And yeah, those would be some great resources. The TPC's seed guide is especially helpful for identifying what you have, what it likes, and how to germinate it. So that's a great resource, and it's all free.
Hey, Bree, I think we missed one.
Oh, do we
If
miss
you
one?
harvest early, will the seed dry?
Yes. Yes, depending on how early it is. So like I said, with partridge pea, there's a certain level that you can look at it and go, okay, it's not burst yet, but it could be still good to go, and then clip it. Sometimes it's a little scary because you think it might be even way too early, but you're usually fine. And that guide also tells you how early you can collect the seed and still be okay.
Do you want to talk about the LRTF one?
Oh, yeah. Living Roadway Trust Fund is what we're referring to here. So that actually helps fund what we're doing right now. So that is, they focus a bit more on our roadsides and our just native plantings in general. So as it pertains to the TPC, they use LRTF funds to go out and collect remnant seed, very zone specific, grow that up into enough source seed to give to the native seed distributors, so then they can increase the different species that they have available. Some of that seed then comes back to us in the counties. When they have roadside managers, they can apply for that seed for free and then put that into our roadsides to get those benefits like runoff mitigation, erosion control. It increases safety a lot of the times as well, having something to break up the landscape, that kind of thing. Can I say the name of the online seed collection guide? It's just got this native seed manual. I can probably stop sharing here and shoot that link into the chat. Maybe I can let you guys see my face just for a little bit. All right, just make sure I have the right spot. Yeah, you just go to the tallgrassprairiecenter.org. They've got tons of resources, like I said, but if you want the native seed guide, you go under plant materials. Oh, sorry, it's the native seed production manual. A lot of it's very technical because it's meant to help at all levels, but it is very helpful.
I was going to say for the next one, Martin, I don't know, do you know anything about stratifying red osier dogwood seeds?
Ooh,
Bree?
I do not off the top of my head.
Because
Not
I was going to say
cuttings.
we can do some research and get back to you, Martin. Because yeah, I understand Jeff replied with the cutting information, but I don't know that we have I don't have the expertise on that one.
Mm-hmm.
But we
Yeah,
can get back to you.
for sure. Can we harvest native seeds and plants from public spaces? Okay, so that's where things get into that ethics of seed collection. So yes and no. Depending on where you're at, you really want to ask for permission to do those things. When we would go out to remnants, a lot of them were on private property. So there's that extra level of, hey, is it okay if we come onto your space and we collect this seed? For public spaces, it's not a bad idea to figure out who manages it, whether it's like the Parks and Rec department, that kind of thing, just to reach out and say, hey, is it okay if I collect some seed? And like I said, follow those rules of 20% of seed from the individual. Don't take too much, and then try to take from a variety of plants throughout the planting, and then don't pull up whole plants because we want to maintain the health of those spaces. senna seeds?
Yeah, I'm gonna ask you answer. Let me let you answer the senna one.
Hello. If you harvest them green.
For some of them, I would, I'm waiting for grass seeds to get drier because then I can just pull them off the stem.
Mm-hmm.
But you do cut some of the seed heads off things, right, Bree?
Yeah, you can definitely cut them off green. They're a legume, so typically those are totally fine. Yeah, they should be fine to dry out. Just make sure you keep them in that bag and keep a close eye on them. When you do harvest them, when they're a little bit more green, you gotta keep them, especially in a dry space. I would even say maybe put a fan on them just to avoid that mold because it can increase the chances of that. How do you find nurseries who provide plants grown without chemicals?
Yeah, good question.
That is a tough one. The best thing to do is ask once you find a native
Mhm.
seed grower that you're interested in. Say, hey, what kind of chemicals do you use? Do you use any at all? Since all of them are so different, and chemicals could mean anything from, say, a fertilizer or even something to help trigger germination. So it's just what you're comfortable with. Yeah, so definitely there's a native seed distributors list on the Tallgrass Prairie Center's website. So if you find someone that you really want to go with there, you can also just reach out to them directly, and that is something that they should know.
Next one with was this a butterfly bush or a butterfly milkweed? I'm guessing, I don't know which way I would go with that, but for me, and I'll let you answer too, Brie, but for me, this time of year, yellow bugs on a plant or any bugs on any plants right now, I'm not terribly concerned because we're going into the winter, and I'm not spraying for bugs. Even if I were earlier, I wouldn't be spraying much this fall because things are going into their dormant season. So I don't know where your feelings are on that, Bree.
Oh, I agree. I wouldn't worry too much about them. It sounds like you have maybe goldenrod soldier beetles, if they're the little beetle looking guys, and those are totally fine. That's pretty typical. And caterpillars, we kind of want those guys, provide that. I wouldn't worry too much about it.
What you know about geraniums? I don't know anything about geraniums, so.
I'm not terribly sure on that. I know they can be pretty resilient.
Mm-hmm. I know my
I
mother kept them alive doing all kinds of things, but I don't remember what they were.
I mean, I have some pretty gorgeous geraniums in the front of the house that I'm in, and there's 4 plants. And all I did with them this year that helped them was essentially what I recommend for natives. I left them in the ground over winter, left all the stems up, didn't touch them. And then in late spring, I think early June, I cut all the stems down to the ground, and then they popped up as big as they were last fall, and they've gone through 2 bloom cycles already.
Wow.
Sorry, it's being a little bit of a pain.
We're down to native and cultivar.
Oh, native and cultivar. I will say be very careful about that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so a native, okay, so it's a little confusing. A native has come directly in the gene line from a plant that was grown wild, essentially. So it's got the typical characteristics in the lineage of those plants. So they might not be as big of a bloom. They might not be in bloom for as long as other plants versus a cultivar that has been specifically bred for those genes to maybe have brighter colors, maybe last a little bit longer with the bloom, maybe be a little bit bigger. So you can, once you get an eye for it, what I've been noticing a lot more lately are coneflowers, especially the pale purple coneflower. They have a lot of cultivars that you'll find in the nursery, and they'll say it's a native plant, but cultivars are a little bit different, and at times they can even be sterile, and they might not be able to even pollinate properly. But they do look really pretty. So depending on what you're looking for, if you're okay with having maybe a less hardy plant, sometimes they do breed for them to be a bit hardier, but you want something that looks native. It's not technically native, so you might get a little bit of a backlash on that. But if you're going for something that like super supports the native environment and want that natural, go for something that's definitely native. Be careful about those tags, because they will try to tell you that it's not a cultivar. Yep, a suggestion for Prairie Moon Nursery from Minnesota. Definitely recommend them.
Yep, great place.
Oh, and then on to that cultivar. So yeah, they might respond differently. That's the other thing about cultivars is sometimes when bred down, they sacrifice the amount of nectar in the food source for pollinators and plants, or sorry, pollinators and other bird species, and they might actually lose the amount of seed that they can provide in lieu of being a larger, more long-lasting bloom. So do be careful if your purpose of your garden and including natives is to support those native species, maybe a cultivar isn't the way to go. I think that's the end of
Awesome.
my list.
I think that was quite lovely, if I have to say so myself.
It was a lot of fun.
Thank you all for the questions. Thank you everyone for joining us. And as I mentioned earlier, we will try to get back to you, Martin, about the red osier dogwood seedling or seed stratification. And if anybody else has questions beyond that too, please let us know. I think as Bree's been doing great on the Facebook page, I think you can post it there as well. Anything else you want to close with, Bree?
Yeah, just keep an eye on the Facebook page. It's not just active during Stewards when it's in the active phase. We have a lot of really great discussion. If you have questions about identification or even recommendations for what other people have done, it's a great spot to ask those things.
Hey, everybody have a great fall and winter. Take care of them plants.
Toasty.
Thank you.
Thank you. Make sure.